Senator John McCain was spiced by Press Secretary Sean Spicer yesterday, who told the senator that he was being disrespectful for questioning the mission in Yemen that killed a Navy SEAL. On Tuesday, McCain released a statement that criticized the Trump administration, calling the mission a success. In the statement, McCain said that while some of the military objectives were met, he would not describe the loss of an American life as a success. Spicer responded yesterday, saying that anyone who would suggest that the operation wasn't a success is doing a disservice to the life of Ryan Owens. Owens was the Navy SEAL killed in battle and who audibly rolled in his grave after Spicer's comments. Spicer then went on to say that American lives will be saved because of the information they gathered in the raid. When asked about the intel, Spicer said that the operation discovered a rare Bob Dylan live recording that is worth, quote, a cool $600 at least. But it looks like as though it's not the only McCain who refuses to celebrate that huge success that killed an 8-year-old girl. Yemen's foreign minister on Wednesday asked for a, quote, reassessment of the great successful attack. Abdul Malik al-Maklavi said that the country is not suspending ground operations in Yemen, contrary to some media reports, but rather wants to analyze the raid to see what went wrong. Or rather, in Trump speak, he wants to know why the raid was such a tremendous success. Intel plans to invest $7 billion and employ 3,000 people in Arizona. CEO Brian Kresnik made the announcement on Wednesday in a meeting with Donald Trump, who misheard and thought he was meeting on a dine on a cross sandwich. Intel's factory will be located in Chandler and will renovate the previous Intel plant called Fab 72 that was never fully built, which is why we shouldn't get that excited yet. The plant's construction was similarly heralded in the media and was used as a symbol of the future of U.S. manufacturing by President Obama. The plant soon became vacant, but let's hope Intel does finish the plant this time, at least before the border wall is put up and Intel loses half its maintenance staff. Kresnik explained to his employees that he met Trump in the White House to show support for Trump's commitment to, quote, leveling the global playing field. He says that the U.S. is disadvantaged when it comes to regulation and taxation. He also said that he wanted to jump on the mattress in the Lincoln bedroom, which Trump allowed for a fee. Intel is one of over 100 companies that signed a letter condemning Trump's Muslim travel ban. The ban could potentially have an impact on the Intel plant, as many workers in tech are here on HB-1 visas. Trump has wavered on whether or not he will reform the HB-1 system, but has already faced some backlash over the suggestion. And U.S. and Mexican economic leaders met yesterday about cross-border trade in light of the Trumpkins' executive order establishing a border wall and a 20% tax on Mexican imports. Mexico's Consul General met with the advisors of Doug Ducey to discuss the impact on the two economies, who engage about $10 billion worth of trade per year. A presentation by Ricardo Pineda showed that 20 million people who cross the Arizona-Mexico border every year, making it one of the busiest borders in the world. Attendee Jim Round said that this is the first time he's ever felt nervous about the long-term economic prospects. He mentioned that how Arizona is still repairing relations with Mexico caused by the fallout after SB 1070 was passed in 2010. As part of the mending, Governor Doug Ducey established a 45-member trade delegation in Mexico City. However, once the border wall goes up, the delegation will be stuck on the other side, and Ducey will pretend he doesn't know them. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly says that he will seek out local community involvement in the building of the border wall on the Mexican border. Whoa, not so fast. Community law enforcement involvement. Kelly says that he met local police to figure out exactly how to close up the border and will let them call the shots. Except for taking the actual shots, that will be the FBI for safety reasons. Kelly said that there may be places that are too rugged to set up a wall, where the U.S. would need to rely on technology and human patrols. So basically, Homeland Security is forcing local police to now devote their resources to the wall effort and work for free. It's almost as if Kelly thinks they are illegal immigrants. And on the same day, the first participant was given cannabis for a study about the effects of the drug on PTSD symptoms. The study involves military veterans and is being undertaken by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. The study is funded by a $2 million grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. It will look at the safety and effectiveness of marijuana on 76 veterans suffering from PTSD. Scientists will record dosing amounts, side effects, and potential benefits. The study is being held in Phoenix under Dr. Sue Sisley at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. It was supposed to take place at the University of Arizona, but the school severed its contract with Sisley after its state senator, Republican Andy Biggs, complained about the project. If you're interested in volunteering for the clinical trial and you hate Andy Biggs, email arizona@marijuanasites.org. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we are undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves. So join us. Do it. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot an email to info@creativetucson.org. We're here from you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of view, so don't be strangers. And now, in national and international news. The Army Corps of Engineers sent out a notice announcing that they would approve the Dakota Access Pipeline by the end of the day today. Energy Transfer Partners will then be able to resume construction of the pipeline, which ignited protests last year and was eventually canceled. However, with the election of pipeline supporter Donald Trump, the pipeline is back on, and so might be the protests. Trump signed an executive order 2 weeks ago authorizing the resumption of the Dakota Access to the dismay of Native American tribes who say that the pipeline travels through their land. They fear that the pipeline leak could potentially taint their water systems as well. Lawyers representing North Dakota's Standing Rock Sioux tribe say that they will challenge the decision in court and demand an environmental impact statement, which was mandated by the Obama administration. But Douglas Lamont, the acting assistant of the Secretary of the Army, says that there is no need for any further environmental reviews. Once the easement is granted, lawyers for Energy Transfer say that it will take 83 days for the oil to start to flow. Tribe members expect protesters to return, such as Chase Iron Eyes, who posted a video on Facebook claiming that a couple thousand people are headed back to the camp. But not everyone in the tribe agrees that this is a good idea. Tribal Chairman Dave Archambault released a statement telling protesters to, quote, "Please respect our people and do not come to Standing Rock." He told supporters to instead focus their energies on lobbying their members of Congress to oppose the pipelines. However, this might not stop the flood of protesters who will be battling against the frigid North Dakota winter. And the state is greeting the protesters with a handful of laws to ensure that they end up in jail. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum is calling for additional federal law enforcement support. The state also approved 4 anti-protest bills on Monday. One would make it a misdemeanor to wear a mask while committing a crime, while 2 others increased penalties for trespassing and riot charges. The 4th bill would make it a felony to cause over $1,000 in economic harm, which was vaguely defined in the law. In an ironic twist, if the 20% tax on Mexican imports turns out to be as damaging as expected, we could have our first felon president. A 2-year experiment in Sweden ended yesterday, which aimed to see what would happen if workers only had to work a 6-hour day with full pay. The scientists behind the study will release their full report in a month, but it's looking so far like the experiment was a success. The hour cut was used at the Gothenburg Elderly Care Home in Svedalen, Sweden, among the nursing staff. During the 18 months of the trial, nurses were found to have used less sick leave, reported better health, and were able to boost productivity by being able to organize 85% more activities for their patients. The experiment began because Sweden is concerned about how to find enough caretaker positions to take care of the country's elderly. It was launched by Sweden's Left Party but was opposed by the Center-Right Party, who tried to stop the experiment early last May. They claimed the experiment wasn't economically sustainable and wasn't worth investing taxpayer money. Daniel Burmar of the Left Party admitted that it probably wouldn't be realistic to expand the program to an entire city, but was optimistic about the results so far. He says that if implemented, the shorter workday would enable the city to hire 17 new nurses through reductions in sick pay costs. While the Left Party endorses the shorter workday, it has a slim chance of being adopted more broadly because the party is only supported by 6% of the country. Next month, the group will replicate the experiment among the cleaning staff at Svelity Hospital, also located in Svedalen. It is opposed by Sweden's Center-Right Party, among with American musician Tag Rundin, who would rather the Swedes, quote, play on the drum all day. A group of senior Republicans descended upon Washington, D.C. yesterday to lobby for their plan in implementing a carbon tax plan. The group, referred to as GOP elder statesmen, included former Secretaries of State James Barker and George Shultz and ex-Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson. They outlined their plan that would cost tax companies $40 for each ton of CO2 emitted, with the price increasing over time. The income made from the tax would be distributed to U.S. citizens on a quarterly basis. The group released a statement saying that evidence on climate change is growing too strong to ignore and that Republicans have looked the other way for too long. In response to their visit, Republicans looked the other way. If their plan were to be taken seriously, it would also eliminate federal environmental regulations, replacing them with the tax. The group claims that the tax would provide an average American family of four with $2,000 in dividends, which would offset the fuel increases that would result due to the tax. After delivering their speech, the GOP elder statesmen rolled up their scrolls and departed for the Rocky Mountains, where they will next seek out the forbidden Republican tax talisman. Minnesota State Rep. John Applebaum introduced a bill in the state that would make recreational marijuana legal in the state. Applebaum was influenced by the success of legalization programs in states like Colorado and Oregon. He envisions a marijuana economy led by Minnesota farmers, distributed by Minnesota companies, sold by Minnesota small business owners, and smoked by Minnesota residents. The bill would make it legal for the state's residents to use, possess, or purchase up to 1 ounce of marijuana for personal use, with retail sales set to begin in 2019. Residents would also be able to grow up to 6 plants, with 3 or fewer being mature. Marijuana use in public places would still be illegal. The opposition says that legalization would be dangerous and unhealthy for the state's residents, and also pointed out that they have reason to believe that Applebaum is only 12 years old. A study from the University of Southern California found that exposure to air pollution at a young age can increase the risk of diabetes. Researchers studied Latino children living in areas where air pollution is higher than average and found that they may have suffered damage due to the pancreas, the organ that produces insulin. This can produce a higher risk of type 2 diabetes later in life. The researchers found that these children had pancreases that were 13% less efficient than normal and had 23% higher blood insulin level, which is usually an indicator that the pancreas isn't functioning efficiently. The study was funded by the National Institutes of Health and is the first to connect air pollution to diabetes risk in children. However, critics caution that Latinos generally come from a lower socioeconomic status and tend to be more overweight, which may have skewed the results. The Guardian received a draft of what might be Donald Trump's next executive order, which involves loosening rules that ban the sale of minerals that come from the Congo. The ban was part of the Dodd-Frank Act, which Trump has slowly but surely been tearing apart for the past week. The rule targets the Congo because minerals sold from the country serve to enrich warlords who have caused violent conflicts in the region. The rule was inserted into the bill out of concern for human rights and mounting evidence that the mineral sales were fueling conflict in the Congo and surrounding areas. Violence in the Congo has claimed more than 5 million lives since the 1990s. The Congo is home to minerals like coltan used in cell phones, laptops, tablets, and other electronic gadgets. Global Witness, an international nonprofit, has been studying the mining of minerals in the Congo for years. They say that the executive order would be a gift to companies wanting to do business with the criminal and the corrupt. In the order's draft, it says that the order, quote, recognizes an important role in the president's responsibility to defend the national security interests in the United States. It's unclear how funding warlords serves to protect our security interests. In related news, the Trump administration will seek to fight global warming by erecting a giant fan powered by a gasoline. The U.S. military has failed to disclose potentially thousands of deadly airstrikes in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, according to an investigation by the Military Times. Airstrikes are supposed to be recorded in an open-source database maintained by the U.S. Air Force. However, the investigation found huge discrepancies between the number reported and the actual number of strikes conducted. This calls into question the reporting of airstrikes and military operations abroad. The investigation found that at least 456 airstrikes in Afghanistan from 2016 alone were not recorded in the database. Just to repeat, that's 456 airstrikes that weren't recorded, meaning that's only a fraction of the amount of airstrikes carried out in Afghanistan last year. Another example is that an Air Force summary said that there were 23,740 strikes against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria last year. However, the database says that there were only 17,861, a difference of almost 6,000 airstrikes. Oddly, the database does not include attacks using Apache helicopters, which have been used extensively since the beginning of the War on Terror in 2001. When asked about the discrepancies, a Department of Defense official said that there's no way to determine how long the military has been excluding the airstrikes. He added that the military is not trying to hide under the number of attacks and said the numbers were, quote, really weird. Indeed. The media has depended on the database for years in determining the death toll, along with the costs associated with the attacks. For example, one Hellfire missile, a commonly used form of ammunition, costs up to $100,000 per missile. So with the inaccurate numbers, it's near impossible to know the real cost of the war on terror, which hasn't made much headway since its 2001 start. If only the government was this cavalier about programs that helped the poor. Donald Trump might have a new tenant at his Trump Tower building in New York, the Pentagon. The United States military is looking to rent space at Trump Tower to use when Trump is done being president, which should only be about a month or so if things keep going the way they're going. A Pentagon spokesman said that the Department of Defense was looking for space to, quote, meet official mission requirements. The DoD has to have a location near all presidents and vice presidents once they are done with their terms. They said that they need this space for personnel and equipment to support the president at his residence. The Pentagon also had to purchase space near President Obama's home in Chicago. They also had to rent space from Joe Biden at his home in Delaware, so this wouldn't be the first time that the Pentagon rented from a former official. But Trump's situation is unique because the price of leasing a room at Trump Tower can be as much as $1.5 million, where Biden's property was purchased for $25,000 plus a six-pack of Schultz. This again raises questions about Trump's conflicts of interest as he still refuses to relinquish control of his foundation. ProPublica reported last week that Trump still hasn't filed the correct paperwork to transfer control of the Trump Foundation. Trump defended himself by saying that he's bogged down with his investigations into voter fraud, and another analyzing whether The Apprentice was, quote, really very much sucks now. The Pentagon plans to move into Trump Tower as soon as the landlord fixes that leak in the ceiling. This was Anais Quintela for 5 on 20 News. Next up, Andrew explains it all, and stay tuned for my interview with the man behind the Tucson Hip Hop Festival, Pike Romero.
Greetings once again. My name is Andrew Conlog, and I'm here with my segment, Andrew Explains It All, where I talk to you a little bit about a subject of interest to me, about Tucson and Southern Arizona and that type of thing. And by the end of it, hopefully you know all of it and can speak authoritatively on the subject. And today, oh man, I have got a good one for you. This guy that I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite guys ever in history. He's closely associated, pardon me. See, I'm so excited I can't even talk. Associated with Tucson, but I would love him anyway. He's fantastic. His name is George Hand, and he was more famous in Tucson even recently than he is now, which is unfortunate because he's pretty cool. Basically, what he's known for is he was a saloon keeper in Tucson in the 1870s, 1880s, and he kept a diary of his life, which is just fascinating. And don't worry, I'm going to get to the diary, but first I kind of want to talk about George and his life and experiences that led him to be here in Tucson. So George was born in Oneida County, New York in 1830. And as a young man, like a lot of young men back east, he got the gold fever and went out to California as one of the 49ers in the gold rush. And apparently he did fine, no problems there, actually did pretty okay by himself. But then in 1861, the Civil War broke out, and to hear his own account of it, he was sort of taken with patriotic fervor, and he wanted to serve his country. And that's what he did. He volunteered for the Union Army. Since it was a volunteer regiment, he was made a sergeant. He was actually voted as a sergeant by his fellow soldiers, partly because he was a little older, partly because he could read, and partly because apparently he was just a nice guy. So he was Sergeant George Hand of the California Column. I mentioned the California Column in my previous segment, but basically the California Column was a group of Union soldiers who were sent to drive out the Confederates from the bottom half of Arizona and New Mexico that they'd been occupying, and then go on, hopefully, to fight the Confederates in Texas. And what they did was got into a lot of interesting adventures. They crossed the deserts and got into a tiny little skirmish at Picacho Peak and took over Tucson without a shot being fired, and actually got involved in a pretty big battle, not with Confederates, but with Apaches at Apache Pass, which is like on the border of Arizona and New Mexico. It's called the Battle of Apache Pass. Incidentally, that is the title of a film from the 50s, 60s era of that type of Western filmmaking where the Native Americans are not played by Native Americans, and it's inaccurate and it's a bad deal. Anyway, back to George, who did not participate in any of that. He didn't really have any adventures at all. He crossed the desert and he was in Tucson for a while. And then for most of the war, he was in New Mexico. There's kind of a garrison of soldiers there to prevent the Texans from trying to reconquer New Mexico and Arizona. And they never did, so good job, George. I mean, he got into some trouble. He was, put in the stockade a couple of times, and apparently rescued like a Native American girl who was being held in some kind of debt slavery by a local family. Whatever, just Sergeant George Hand's adventures. But eventually he was mustered out and kind of kicked around the Southwest for a while after that. Eventually he found his way back to Tucson, and a lot of the California Column veterans actually sort of settled in Tucson and became prominent folks. And through those connections, he got hooked up with a guy named George Foster, two Georges starting a saloon together, and that's just what they did. And that is when his diary comes from. And boy, is it interesting. I'm gonna get to it, I promise. But just as kind of a coda of George's life, he was the janitor of the Pima County Courthouse after his saloon business kind of petered out. And was by all accounts just kind of a nice old salt who people like to talk to. And when he died, he was buried in Evergreen Cemetery over on Oracle, where he's buried with other veterans of the Civil War in the Union Army. Now to the diary. He actually did keep a diary when he was in the California column and then stopped keeping a diary. And he actually expressed regret that he stopped keeping the diary. And when he started again, which when he was the saloon keeper, I'm sure glad he did. And a lot of other people were too. Actually, entries from his diary were put into the Arizona Daily Star starting in the 1920s. And those ran all the way up to the 1970s. Of course, though, since it was a newspaper, all the off-color stuff, of which there is a lot, was cut out. But I guess that's neither here nor there at this point. Also, if you're interested in the actual physical copies of the diaries themselves, they are lovingly cared for by the Arizona Historical Society. Now, as to George's diary, which my source is this compilation of the diaries in a book called Whiskey, Six Guns, and Red Light Ladies, which is edited by Neil Carmody. It is just makes for fascinating reading. And one reason is because you really get the history of Tucson at this time, and you also really get even kind of the wider history of the world, which is interesting. It was fascinating reading it during this election season. Actually, in 1876, there was an eerily similar election that in many ways was even worse and more divisive. The Democratic candidate Samuel Tilden won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College to the Republican challenger Rutherford B. Hayes, actually by a single electoral vote, won. Under circumstances that were not even questionably dubious. They were dubious, they were bad news. And it's just interesting to hear what George has to say about that. He was very involved in politics. He was a lifelong Republican, as a lot of Union veterans were. For example, here on November 8th, which was right around the time of the election, he says, all sorts of rumors are afloat. Some telegrams say that Tilden carried several northern states. Others say Hayes has got them all. And you'll also have to remember that, there's telegrams that have, a limited amount of information, but that papers, had to be kind of delivered by horses or by rail, so there was not a lot of instant connection, which is evident also from November 16th, where he says, stage came in, no news. None of the telegrams about the election is reliable. No one knows who is in and who is out. There is lots of talk of trouble in the states, which is also interesting. He kind of delineates these territory guys from the, I guess, sort of tenderfoots in the states. But the best part about George's diaries and what he devotes most of the time to is just talking about his own insane life, which was really crazy. He was just like an old, weird drunk, basically. The vast majority of his diary is his adventures in the saloon, being drunk with his friends. If you've ever seen It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, picture like that crossed with gun smoke, and you've got it. You really have it. One of my favorite idiosyncrasies is that when he procured the services of a prostitute, at the end of his diary entry, he would just write her name and followed by a dash and the amount of money that it cost him. By his diary, one of his favorites was a woman that he lovingly referred to as Big Carmel. And with that, I want to read you a couple of my favorite entries here. This is just kind of a typical day in the life of George Hand from April 5th, 1876. Fine day. Everyone is tight, which means drunk. We are having great arguments on fish and fishing. Hunt is on a kind of spree and all his fishing and sailoring. Sanders got pretty full, which means drunk, and struck a friend of his from Texas. Also, any kind of thing that you don't know what it quite might mean, like tight and full, it means drunk. Basically, every weird word he uses means drunk. But there he is. He's just fighting with his friends about fishing and sailing for no discernible reasons, and a guy socked another guy. And that's actually most of his existence. Of course, there were special days, like All Hallows Eve, Halloween in 1876. George writes, colder. There was a funeral today of a child who was burned to a crisp in bed. I put up the stove this evening. So Halloween gets pretty real in Tucson. Actually, life in general gets pretty real. He'll occasionally allude in that sort of very dry way to very dark stuff happening, like smallpox and death and attacks and things. But not always doom and gloom. Take, for example, the wonderful holiday of Christmas, particularly Christmas Eve on the same year, 1876, where George writes, fine day, very dull in the house until night when everyone got full of whiskey. Fighting was then the order of the day. There were several fights and more fighting talk. I went to church at midnight. The streets were full of drunken men all night, and I went to bed at 1:30 o'clock. There you go. So that's George Hand's Christmas, a George Hand Christmas. I would also like to just talk, if you'll permit me, a couple more entries that are just my favorite. Back in time to the same year, 1876, on September 1st of that year, George writes one word, and that word is drunk. The next day, September 2nd, he writes another word. It is the same word, drunk. On September 3rd, which sort of the internal accounting of this version of the Dryer Notes is a Sunday, he writes another one-word entry. It is also drunk. And then finally, on September 4th, he begins his entry with drunk. And then says he went to a feast. And then it kind of goes on from there. But I just love to imagine what was going on and what possessed this man to just be ostensibly blitzed out of his mind for days, the better part of a week. But, you know, he was able to stumble in his diary and write the word drunk. And then finally, for a final little entry here, probably, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I think it encapsulates the spirit of George Hand the best. Skipping back to 1875 on August the 30th, George writes, I was drunk early and late, drunk all day, very drunk, disgustingly drunk. Everyone is drunk. I went to the plaza, stayed 5 minutes, came home, and went to bed. Refugia, $1. It might be Refugia, actually, I'm not sure. But the point is that is a prostitute that he hired for the price of a single dollar. If you liked George Hand, which I sure hope you did, I would encourage you to find this book. It's a little hard to find, but you know, it's kind of a Tucson local, so you can probably dig it up somewhere. I also would encourage you here for the modern technological age to follow George on Twitter. Yes, he has a Twitter account that tweets every day with the day of the year matching a day in the life of George Hand. You can follow him at AZ Saloon Diary. That's capital AZ, capital S Saloon, capital D Diary. And to answer the two questions you certainly have, yes, it is I who is managing that account because I love George and want him to be spread to the world. And yes, he does have a very devoted, although very small following of artistic types from New York City. That is all for today for Andrew Explains It All. This is Andrew Conlog signing off.
What's up, Tucson? I'm Anais Quintela, and I'm here today with Pike Romero, local producer, manager, DJ, just all-around hustler of the local hip-hop scene. He also happens to be the man behind the Tucson Hip Hop Festival. How are you doing today, Pike?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So tell me a little bit about the Tucson Hip Hop Festival.
The Tucson Hip Hop Festival is going to be at 191 Tool. It's a block party. Essentially showing Tucson hip hop as a whole. So all elements, b-boys, DJs, graffiti, production, you know, and then of course emceeing. So you know, it's just kind of encompassing all of Tucson hip hop, which is super dope right now. So
yeah, I know in the past you guys have done summits, and this is the first year you guys are kind of turning it into a big festival.
Yeah, we really wanted to blow it out this year. We had a summit in 2015. Which kind of just showcased a really small, you know, maybe like 30 performances in some panels. And this year we're blowing it up to close to 100 people.
So why now?
It just the scene right now is super thriving. Like it's just growing. The quality over quantity is what I like about it the most. It's diverse. So it just feels like it's right. There's so many cool things happening here in Tucson. The Rat Van is really popping off. Pushing Buttons is really popping off.
Yeah.
The Scratch Shack, we are bugging out. Like, it's just a lot of cool stuff that's happening in Tucson, and we kind of want to showcase that on the hip hop side.
Yeah,
So,
hell yeah.
yeah.
Tell me about some of the artists that you can find at the festival.
So yeah, we'll definitely have Murs, who is headlining. That's the big factor because
So
he's
stoked.
like he's incredible. Live, he's incredible. Lando Chill is amazing. He's had an amazing year signing with Mellow Music Group. Marley B is another incredible MC that is here, and he's had a great year as well. His album release Grow was off the charts. We got b-boys, we got DJs. It's just there's just so much like awesomeness that's gonna be there.
Yeah.
So I'm excited
exciting.
for it. It's gonna be dope.
What about on the vending side of things?
Yeah, we got a lot of cool vendors. We got Stonehouse Clothing, we got Top TOP. The Old Pueblo is going to be there. Kiss of Smoke Barbecue, which is an amazing barbecue joint. Food truck. We have Creative Tucson's going to be there. So yeah, it's going to be really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Creative Tucson will be there. You can catch our all-encompassing coverage of Marley B and Lando Chill the day of the festival. Keep an eye out for that.
It's going to be super dope.
So you guys are a little bit involved with the University of Arizona's College of Humanitarian Africana Studies?
Yeah. So they have a hip hop minor there at the university, and they've just been really supportive of connecting with local talent, with local hip hop. So this is a way for us to just kind of get together with them. We have educational panels with them that'll be going on during the festival. So, not only do we showcase just the entertainment side, but the knowledge aspect of it. We want people to grow, as artists and as a community from this whole event. That's what it's really about, is just celebrating the community that we have here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and of course the university is a major part of that. So we're happy to have them on board and excited for it.
So if anyone wants to get involved or volunteer, they can...
Yeah, TucsonHipHopFestival.com/volunteer. You can fill out the application there. We have a meeting next Thursday, so we're obviously looking for volunteers for the festival. So it's gonna be cool.
It's mostly volunteer driven?
Yeah, for sure. We have about 15 people that are ambassadors that have put together everything. So on top of myself, we have 15 other people that are handpicked and coordinated, over 250 applicants for the festival. So. Yeah.
And for people that don't want to volunteer and just want to go and listen to dope music and check it out, tickets are $10 and $25 for VIP, right?
Exactly. And you can get those through TucsonHipHopFestival.com or the Rialto Theater website. And the tickets are there, $10 and $25 for VIP.
Awesome. Thanks, Pike.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for watching. You can catch us on February 25th at the Tucson Hip Hop Festival 191 Tool. You can check out more information at the TucsonHipHopFestival.com website also. Have a great rest of your Thursday, Tucson. We'll catch you next time.